So I'm going to offer, there are two questions that are slightly different but on a similar theme. So one person wants some support for you to help us understand how to respond positively to negative Israeli sentiment that's in the news without divulging any personal commentary. But when we hear negative things, how might we respond? And the other question is similar but different. It says, it looks to me like Israel's no longer living into Jewish values. How do we live? See, I need my glasses. How do we live with this, and what's our responsibility to a state that doesn't feel Jewish? And so, on the one hand, the question is, how do we deal with negative from the external? I see this negative thing happening in Israel, how do I respond? And this other person, it sounds like, is having the same experience internally. They personally are having a negative reaction to Israel. So I'm curious, give you a second to think about it. Rabbi Lipton's a fast thinker. Oh, Rabbi Brown, here, you want to go for it? We don't all have to answer every single one, don't worry.
Okay, the second one was, now.
How do I live, what is our responsibility to a state that doesn't feel Jewish? There's negative feelings about Israel within themselves. It's not just external.
Yeah, so I wish I could predict what was going to happen in Israel politically, but I can't.
Don't we all?
I know. I think of Israel like a state in the United States or a country in the world. And maybe there's a state in the United States that fits your politics really well. And you can see yourself living in that state. Maybe you do live in that state. And then there are states that don't fit your politics at all. Could you still go to that state for vacation or visit family there or feel that you could buy products from that place? I think I'm not saying this is going to happen, but as a dramatic what if Israel becomes the Jewish Saudi Arabia? I'd still be a Zionist. I may not agree with what their politicians are doing or saying or their laws, but I'm still a Zionist. I still believe that Israel should exist. I still believe Israel's a place I should go. I still believe I have a personal connection to that place. Just like I feel Memphis is where my mom was born, and I can still love Tennessee, despite what they do with whatever laws they have. So it's not to minimize the importance of it. I would love for Israel to be a beautiful Jewish state with Jewish values that match my Jewish values. But it might go to somebody else's Jewish values, because guess what? Not all Jews have the same exact values. The first question, I think, if I'm remembering right,
negative criticism.
Negative criticism. I have two things, at least when I hear them, that I try and say. One is when people criticize Israel, I try to. I learned this from a colleague, so I give him credit for it. So Rabbi Jaffe taught me that one is to say, well, what's your solution to the problem? So whatever the criticism is Israel's doing this, Israel's doing that, I don't like Israel for this reason. Okay, so what's your solution, particularly when we're talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And if the solution means that there's no longer a Jewish state, then let's talk about why that's not a solution. The second one is a hypocritical test. And this I learned from my own mistakes, let's say. When I was living in Israel, I want to say in 06, maybe. No, later than that, I don't know. It was sometime after that. Anyway, at the time, there had been heavy criticism of Israel for, which is, you've seen before, X number of Israelis were killed because rockets were fired or something, there was an incursion, and then 5 times that number of Palestinian, quote, civilians were killed. And the world is outraged, it's all in the papers. Israel, the IDF kills 75 civilians in Israel, in the Palestinian territories. And in discussing this, I was upset. I was like, why would the numbers be so different? And an Israeli said to me, do you know what the numbers are for the Iraq War? And I had no idea. Here I was an American living in Israel. So because I figured I would say this tonight, I looked it up last night. I'm just going to read this one sentence. In 2007, When there were 900 American casualties, that year there were 25,000 civilian deaths caused in Iraq by American forces. That's in a war that we now, I think, can safely say, we started, maybe not safely, we can argue, was started without cause. That was just 1 year, by the way. So the world is upset over not to say that people should be killed, but if I'm going to be critical, so when somebody else is critical, I would say, you can be critical as long as you're equally critical of your own government and your own situation, you're knowledgeable about that. If you're only picking on Israel, then it's not fair. Turned it off.
Well, we have a room at just for people like to call the Situation Room. That's where people like to hang out before or after services. And you can imagine you have a few Jews in the room, you figure out all the world's worst problems. Now, I don't necessarily have solutions to all the problems, but I can say that when it comes to a lot of these things, well, I guess I'll try to address both of your points together. Take away politics, for example. Take away even our history. Think about the fact that we have a country, a random country, which has 7 million of our brothers and sisters there. And in the aftermath of a Holocaust that wiped away half of the Jewish population, we don't have the luxury not to support our brothers and sisters. And you could be in a fight with your brother, you could love your brother, you could be in a fight with your sister, you could love your sister, but at the end of the day, you support them, or you should support them, you have to support them. And so, for someone as a challenge, I say at the end of the day, these are our brothers and sisters. And it's not about the politics, it's not about the history even. In a certain sense it is, but in a certain sense, it really defies all that as well. But I think more than that, a lot of times, and we could try to have the exact right answers to give someone of this critique. When there's critique, a lot of times we're not looking for answers. Sometimes people are looking for answers, but many are not also. And I think that whether they are or not looking for answers, one of the things that we could do is to show more empathy and love towards others around us. And when we show more care to someone next to us, and we show that we're ready to accept despite the many differences we have, and we're ready to be there and unite together, you'll see a lot of the ideological differences and the things that, the critique that may be so harsh ends up softening when people realize that we're just another person, we're here for each other, we're caring for each other. The more kind you are, the more caring, the more the differences will go away.
I think that my response, if the framing of the question, if I understand it correctly, the response is about how we're feeling about what we're perceiving. And I'd like to suggest that just as when something happens in our environment that we perceive is a particular way, the perception isn't always the reality of what's going on in that moment. And that I would strive to find out more information. I would strive to speak to people who are on the inside, who could give me some insight about what's happening. Just as when and you'll never hear me talk about politics. Those of you who know me, I'll proclaim it loud off of the tops of any building. But if there is something that is perceived in this country that we don't agree with, instead of listening to how the negativity is amplified, going to the source and having somebody who is actually experiencing it and having them give you the insight from the inside ultimately leads to a better understanding of being able to make valued judgments and responses that take the humanity of the situations in mind instead of simply responding to what the perception is through whatever filter we've heard. So I would suggest that knowledge, digging in, speaking to people that you respect, and not just amplifying voices of something that you think you heard, ultimately gets us beyond the feelings to the facts. And then we have an opportunity to respond. That would always be my approach.